So, what is a professional fiduciary? And if you're a real estate agent or investor in the space, or a family that's inheriting property, why would you want to use, or where would a professional fiduciary come in to help you? Today, I have a chance to talk to you, really one of my closest friends, a longtime friend, and real estate professional, former appraiser, licensed agent, but professional licensed fiduciary in the state of California, Kevin Bemel. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Bill. It's great to be able to do this. Finally, we've been talking about it for a while. So
I know we talk all the time personally, and as I mentioned, you're a longtime friend. We know each other through Jewish Federation Real Estate Group. We know each other professionally through real estate. Followed you and your family through your service in the military as a member of the clergy for the Navy. Thanks for your service. And now you're out helping service members transition. But your business, among other things, you have a number of different areas that you're able to help people. But one is a professional fiduciary. So explain to me. I know a professional means you get paid at it. What is it? And I am a fiduciary by law. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my clients. But what is a person who acts as a fiduciary? What do you do when you put on your fiduciary hat? And what's that hat look like?
right. So I mean, it's a great question because this is a relatively new licensed field, and actually, I have you to thank for telling me about it because I had never heard of it until you mentioned it to me. I think maybe about a year ago. So a professional fiduciary is someone who essentially acts in the place of another person. And that's somewhat vague. So they do so with respect to certain types of matters. So one that you mentioned would be the settling of an estate or the settling of a trust after there's been the death of one or more people. Another could be the setting up of a conservatorship for someone who's no longer able to handle some or all of their business affairs, and so they need someone to step in and do that for them. And there are other less common situations. Those are the two you see most often. And the reason California went in this direction is historically there have been people filling these conservatorship roles, et cetera. And yet, as our friend, Terry Magedy could tell us about, there's so much elder abuse that goes on, for example, where people are taken advantage of because they just really don't know how to handle certain types of business affairs. So in order to try and avoid this unscrupulous behavior, California and I think about 7 or 8 other states enacted a licensing program so that now anyone who's handling more than one estate or conservatorship or other than their ethically, properly, et cetera.
And so I would imagine commonly as a fiduciary, you're going to end up working with attorneys representing an estate or representing creditors or representing objectors or other heirs.
Quite a long time, actually. And as a result, there's basically 2 times when a professional fiduciary will be brought into some kind of estate or trust matter. And that is when the appointed representative, be it an executor, administrator, whatever, really doesn't have the expertise in order to handle the types of matters that have to be handled, either because it's very large or, they may just not have the background, or they may simply just not have the time. And so It's better for them to hire a professional rather than take time away from their other business or whatever else it is they're doing. Right. The other situation where professional fiduciaries often act is where there is conflict between heirs or beneficiaries of a trust to the point where it doesn't make sense for one of them to be managing the affairs of the estate and for them to do it jointly, it just doesn't work. So then the fiduciary comes in as basically a neutral third party who mediates, typically not only between the parties who are actually going to benefit from it, but as you noted, their lawyers. There may be, it may be an action filed in court, so there may be a probate action. So now you've got a judge involved, and the professional fiduciary then is dealing with all of these different parties, making sure everything's being taken care of properly, and hopefully reducing, some of the conflict.
So that's why I've seen it in probate cases where brother and sister, and they both want to be the executor. You don't want them to be co-executors, because then they both have to agree on every decision, and that may or may not work. In a case where it doesn't work, you have a third entity, which is the estate. And then the fiduciary's job is to do what's best for the estate. And at some time, one brother or sister disagree, and the other one disagree. They may both disagree, but the job of the fiduciary is to do what's best for the estate. How do you determine what's best for the estate if both parties think they both think they get 51%, and they're supposed to get 50? How do you manage that process?
Well, so then that comes down to looking at the documents, seeing what's there, and going through a dealt with a case where one party was claiming a percentage more than they were entitled to. One of the common places conflicts actually come is where, because of how the will or the trust has been set up, one beneficiary, for example, is getting while the person for whom the person who collected the assets is still alive, and they need to be supported. And now you're at a point where either the house has to be sold or the securities have to be sold, right? And so one of the heirs is going to be losing out, and they start fighting even before the person is deceased.
Right.
So that's a process of examining the relative values, how much cash needs to be generated for what period of time. And, in the end, it really comes down to a judgment call and or a negotiation. So it may be that you'll negotiate with the heirs and say, look, rather than, dividing things up by asset class, it would have been better if it had been divided up by percentages. And so that way, you'll both, benefit, rather than having one person losing out and the other person getting whatever remains. So, these are the kinds of issues that come up that a, professional fiduciary works to resolve as amicably and also as, inexpensively as possible. I'm sure you can imagine estate planning attorneys are expensive.
Yep.
And so the more you fight, the more, goes to legal fees, which isn't necessarily a good thing.
One of the common differences I see is there's two siblings fighting over selling a property. One wants to sell, one doesn't. Typically, one that doesn't is living there rent-free for 10 years. And the sibling who's there says, well, we're going to sell for $2 million. And the one who's living there rent-free says, oh, no, it's worth $3 million. And so I know we have a court process to determine the value, but then you also have a background as a real estate appraiser. So tell me about how much can you get involved in? Is that one of the tools you bring to the party? Or is that a separate professional as far as evaluating the appraisals and what's best for this estate?
Right. So in a case like that, whereas in previous work, I was the appraiser brought in to do that appraisal on behalf of the conservator or the fiduciary. As the fiduciary, I would bring a third-party appraiser in order to maintain the the separation from me. Mm. And again, the best case scenario would be to get the parties to agree on who that appraiser would be and to accept what that appraiser says.
As if that's possible.
That's not possible.
In many cases, right?
Right. So then you have alternatives. I can hire one appraiser and rely on that person, or I could have each of the parties select their own appraiser, and then, depending on how far apart they are, I'll select a third appraiser to, kind of mediate between the two appraisals and come up with the final number.
So, not that everything comes down to money, but at some point you got to get paid, and that's a consideration. So, what does a fiduciary cost? Of course, we like to think you're worth the value because you're going to get more assets or a better result for the estate or the family. But at the end of the day, they got to agree to pay you something. So, how does that work as far as the fees? And is it up front? Is it upon liquidation of assets, or how do you manage that?
Right. So, fees depend on a number of factors. One is the fiduciary licensed or not? So if a fiduciary isn't licensed, so typically they're not going to get fees commensurate with that professional designation. Also, experience, both length and breadth of experience matter, also then the size of the estate being handled will be a factor. So if it's a very large estate, and we're talking, multiple millions, so then the fee may be based on a percentage of the value of the estate, not unlike what you would see. For example, I handled a matter in Alabama, and statutory fees in Alabama are 0.5% of the value of the estate coming into probate, and then 0.5% of the value of the estate coming out of probate. So you would say, well, aren't those the same? Not necessarily, but roughly 1% of the value of the estate. On other matters, the fiduciary will charge an hourly fee plus expenses, and that fee can vary. On the low end, there's probably fiduciaries out there who will charge $100 or $150 an hour, something like that, up to the most experienced who are charging over $350, $400 an hour. So most are kind of hitting in the middle, in the $2 to $350 range, and what you can see is these fees are lower than what you would pay a lawyer, even though they may seem somewhat high. But to have a lawyer handle it would be much more expensive, and typically lawyers don't have the depth of experience in managing assets and selling assets in the same way that a professional fiduciary does.
Right. Wow. Well, look, I appreciate the chance to chat with you, Kevin, as a good friend, but professionally as well, to learn more about this. And I do get phone calls from time to time of people looking for fiduciaries, and part of it is because it seems that the population of experienced fiduciaries is so limited. And the few times that I've called, I can't even get a return phone call or email, even somebody I've been referred to, and I'm not all that in a bag of chips, but I feel like I have a decent reputation. What is that about? And what should somebody expect if they reach out to you for a consult or for questions?
Right. So, I don't recall how many licensed real estate agents there are in California, but I think it's several 100,000 or something.
Yeah, I want to say nationwide 1 million. In California, I'd say about 150,000.
Okay, so my professional fiduciary license that I received earlier this month, I'm sorry, the end of last month, I'm number 1,847.
Okay.
So there's not a lot around, and out of that, a little over 1,800, not all of those people are still practicing. Right. So there's not a lot of them. It's a fair amount of work to get the license, and the exam is not easy. I was in a meeting last week or the week before, and you have to pass both a national exam and a state exam. And one of the people in the meeting was saying she had passed the national exam, but so far she'd taken the state exam 3 times and hadn't passed.
Wow.
So, and she was clearly an intelligent woman. She knew but it's just, it's a tough exam to pass. So the number of fiduciaries isn't that large, number one. And number two, as a result, they are very busy. As the population has aged, the work for fiduciaries, there's just been more and more work for fiduciaries. And, to a certain extent, they can pick and choose. And, having talked to a number of them during my training, one of the stories they like to tell is how they were working on a matter, and it just got to the point where they could no longer be effective because of the dispute of the parties, and so they bowed out. And the fact that they can do that shows you that they really have the opportunity to pick and choose. So, from my standpoint, and I've been in service business, aside from my time in the Navy, I've been in service businesses my entire professional career. So, somebody can expect a call back from me no matter what. I can't guarantee that I'll take a particular matter because I need to know what it's about and whether it's something that's appropriate for me to handle. If it's not appropriate for me to handle, then what I will do my best to do is refer them to someone else who will, speak to them and be, an appropriate professional that can handle their matter.
Nice.
I do feel like that's a responsibility I have to the profession at large. It's disturbing that not everybody looks at it that way. What can I say?
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, and if someone wanted to reach out to you to either to consult with you as to whether you're available on a particular matter, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So they can reach me by email. My email address is just like my name, kevin@bemel.com, KEVIN @B as in building, EMEL.com. And that's usually the best way. They can call me. My telephone number is 310-994-6385. And you and I are of the generation who remembers that number again in LA and the Valley. 310-994-6385. You can also send me a text message. And if any of your viewers or listeners do, I do encourage you to mention that you're contacting me because you're looking for a professional fiduciary. I'm sure you all know these days you get a lot of junk phone calls and scam phone calls and text messages on your phones, and so that way it's just I'll know why you're contacting me, and I can get back to you as quickly as possible.
Well, Kevin, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Usually it's more lighthearted and less business focused, but it's great to, because we've known each other for a long time, but I feel very comfortable introducing you to my best clients I have, and will continue to do so. In fact, a lot of them. Just quick, funny story. I remember one day you were bragging about how in your live stream you had interviewed one of the top attorneys, or I think I bragged to you, I interviewed one of the top attorneys in LA. It turned out you had also interviewed him the day before. And so we walk in the same circles and work with some of the great people, and always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Glad to be able to do it.